My name is Vahangwele Manavea. The purpose of today's module is to introduce ESG and how it fits into the investment process. As part of the session, Van and I will outline the theoretical concept of ESG and the practical aspect of it. The first part will answer the three key questions that most of you might have. What is ESG? Why ESG is relevant in today's world? And how will ESG enhance my portfolio?
Hello, and my name is Vani Navratnam. During the second half of this module, Hungmi and I will be providing you with some practical knowledge on what you need to have in place as a new fund manager in terms of ESG. We will also be discussing the ESG terms that you're likely to negotiate into your agreements with your limited partners and your portfolio companies. The outcome of this module is to provide you with some insight into ESG and help you with your ESG thinking. To assist with this, Hungmi and I have curated a number of reading materials. In addition to that, we've also developed a PowerPoint template that you can leverage to formulate and think through your ESG approach. This module has three sections, and we begin by talking about the relevance of ESG to your business and the communities in which we live in.
In this session, we're looking at the top perceived global risk from the study that was done in 2020. Looking at the source of the study is WEF. So this section outlined the risk by two sections. It looked at the risk by likelihood and risk by impact. Looking at risk by likelihood is the chance or probability identified risk to occur. And then looking at a risk by impact is the potential losses associated with the identified risk. So if you look at our area, looking at our continent, I've identified three key risks that you will agree with me that we have gone through and have experienced the impact of that risk during the year. The first one that has been identified is infectious disease, the climate change and extreme weather. And if you look at the categorization, you will agree with me that infectious disease and climate change have come on top, whereas the risk for extreme weather have been categorized in different spaces. By likelihood, it was one of the things that came first, but by impact is something that came towards the bottom. And the reason for that is maybe because it didn't really happen, and this study was just done globally, but looking at our continent, you will agree with me that that risk should have been categorized up above, because we did experience a lot of floods in our continent, especially at the southern part. I mean, looking at the infectious disease, yes, we have gone through a number of diseases. We've gone through the COVID-19, we've gone through Ebola, we've gone through malaria as usual. Those are some of the infectious diseases that we have gone through.
In this slide, we're looking to show how we all live in an interconnected world, where even something as seemingly small as whether we leave the lights on when we leave the room can have long-term and far-reaching effects. As individuals, communities, and investors, we have an obligation to recognize how each investment and consumption decision that we make can have long-term impacts in many facets of our lives. Additionally, as investors, we should also recognize that our decisions can contribute to the continued disenfranchisement of large parts of the population who do not have access to the sweeping social and economic changes and reforms being enabled by a rapidly changing world and accelerated by the digital revolution. So, how is it that a small thing such as leaving the lights on can have a much deeper impact? So let's begin by putting this into perspective. Did you know that 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to housing, mobility, and nutrition? Humans are in fact the largest contributors to environmental degradation. So what does leaving the lights on mean? It means that we're using much more electricity. This translates in turn to more fuel being burnt, which in turn affects the environmental on two fronts: increased resource extraction and increased emissions from energy generation. So let's dive a bit deeper into this. Extreme weather, which is one of the elements that's been flagged on this slide, has actually topped the list of risks when it comes to perceived global risk in 2020, according to the World Economic Forum. We recognize that extreme weather events are intensifying across the world. As a result, we've seen increase in flooding, in urban areas, and so has the number of people living in water-stressed areas. For example, there's drought in South Africa, whereas in Mozambique, we've actually seen a lot more cases of cyclones and flooding. We also need to recognize that the most vulnerable in our countries are the individuals who bear a disproportionate brunt of these events, in particular women and children. In addition to this, there is then the result of waterborne diseases from these extreme weather events, impacting the health of millions. In addition, extreme weather is also responsible for 7 million deaths annually. As we can see, one small event can have cascading impacts across a number of our human systems.
The importance of ESG. If you look at ESG, it's driven by a number of aspects, and including the investor, the fund managers, and everyone else that really care about sustainability. Looking at it, what value does it really drive in your investment? It really manages the risk and also drive value. So looking at those aspects, if ESG is fully integrated into the investment process, it helps both investor and fund manager to proactively identify and manage ESG-related risks. Those risks are associated with people, planet, and profit. And the same way, if it is done, it also helps in terms of creating value. The second aspect that we could look at is also investor demand. Investors are more and more, especially looking at DFIs and institutional investors, they are more and more looking and insisting that fund managers and portfolio companies consider ESG as part of their fiduciary duties. They also need to also integrate it into their investment process and be able to identify ESG-related risk in all the decision making. That really helps in terms of managing the risk that I spoke about and also creating value. As a result of the investors' demand, you are now starting to see that investors, investment managers, they've got a requirement as part of their responsibility to consider ESG and integrate it into the investment process. The last aspect that I really want to talk about is the fiduciary duty. You will all understand that directors have got fiduciary duties, fund manager have got fiduciary duties, and trustee have got same fiduciary duties as well. And part of that fiduciary duty, they have to really manage the liability that comes to the company. And by embracing ESG, by ensuring that the people, the planet, and the profit has been managed, you will realize that they will reduce the liability that comes with the company, because issues like environmental, social issues will be properly managed, and they will really have a good governance to manage their companies as well.
So what do the markets want? PE as an asset class within Africa has been driven by the development financial institutions, also known as the DFIs. And one of the first things these DFIs insist upon is whether a fund manager has taken the time to establish an approach to ESG within the investment framework. Not having ESG practices or even a basic ESG approach in place speaks to your lack of commitment towards ESG. What this means is that you quickly lose access to a very critical pool of capital, and the size of this pool is not insignificant. As you can see, $38 trillion is currently under global ESG asset management. And over the next 2 decades, the funds available for ESG targeted investments is expected to rise to as much as $50 trillion. Additionally, this amount could increase as a result of the pandemic, which has raised fundamental questions about the way in which we live, consume, and do business. Another number that I would like to draw your attention to is the $30 trillion which will be transferred from baby boomers to 90 million millennials over the next few decades. And these millennials are demanding that investments and the companies that they engage with through consumption and even through jobs are becoming a lot more cognizant of the sustainability impact. The call for ESG programs within investments is definitely gaining momentum every day. The critical question you have to ask yourself is whether you're willing to forego access to this very large pool of capital by not integrating ESG considerations into your investment approach. In this section, we are going to provide you with a very quick look into what ESG is and what ESG covers. We are also going to provide you with examples of ESG-informed strategies that can help you create value for your businesses. So what is ESG? Let's start off by thinking through what these three little letters encompass. E stands for environmental, S stands for social, and G for governance. If this is the first time you're coming across ESG, you can see that these three little letters cover a wide range of issues which you should consider as part of your review of potential portfolio companies. Under E, we look at areas such as effluent discharge, waste management, energy usage, and even hazardous waste. For example, if you're a hospital, we would ask you how medical waste, syringes, sharp objects, and radioactive waste is being managed on-site as well as off-site, and if the hospitals are actually using authorized hazardous waste companies to dispose of these materials. Under social, we will look at employment practices such as freedom of association, access to unions, grievance mechanisms, and whether or not companies have contracts in place. The most basic thing that every company needs to have in place, though, is alignment with the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Other issues that we would look at is health and safety for employees and for local communities and stakeholders. Under this, you would consider things such as, do you have protective equipment in place for your employees? Is there health and safety training in place? And is there any air or noise pollution which can impact communities as well as your employees? And under governance, we would look at the integrity of a business, how a board is structured, and if there are non-executive directors on the board.
What are ESG-informed investment strategies that help create value for your fund? We have adopted the 5 key strategies as adopted by McKinsey. As part of your reading material, we have provided a document that outlines all these strategies in detail. You also need to understand that ESG value creation ranges from short-term to long-term. When you have integrated ESG into your processes, the following aspects will be positively impacted. Top-line growth of your business. We are living in time where people want to know the product they're buying, how they were made, and how they contribute to sustainability principles. Proper ESG implementation can attract new clients and investors. The second aspect is cost reduction. ESG has the potential to reduce the cost of running your business, depending on how you implement some of these approaches. Giving some of the example, if your employees start to feel appreciated within the business, they will commit their time fully to the business, and that will reduce unnecessary stoppage and industrial action. The second aspect that I really want to flag is environmental management. The environmental issue can attract liability and fine from the regulators. However, if the company care about the environment, they will be able to comply with the regulation and adopt best practice principles that reduce those fines.
In this slide, I'm going to talk to you about some practical examples of ESG value creation strategies. Adopting new technologies is one such example. And while adopting new technologies can come with initial costs for implementation that is high, it also comes with material and time efficiencies, which can reduce input costs, reduce waste, and increase productivity. New technologies can also create new revenue streams. For example, an East African hospital that we invested in was discovered to not be disposing of its medical waste in line with best practices. Locally, there was also little in the way of regulation to leverage or comply with. To address this issue, we sourced funding to build an incinerator on site in line with international standards. This incinerator not only ensured medical waste was being properly disposed of, but also became a new revenue generation asset when other local hospitals approached us to manage their medical waste disposal. Another strategy is effective boards. When looking at the board, we do ask you to consider who is sitting on the board and how they're contributing to the strategic goals of a company. Are they board members? Are they friends of the CEO or the founder? And if there's diversification in terms of experience, gender, or race on the boards. The last thing that we want on a board is a board that always aligns on everything because of the fact that the board looks like each other. So to make sure that there is diversity on the boards and that's the right expertise on the boards, we do encourage that you bring in independent directors as well as sector experts, and they do not necessarily need to be friends of the CEO. They need to bring the right set of skills to ensure that the strategic goals of the business are always being met. The other thing that you also want to think about when you're looking at the board is to avoid group thinking, to make sure that the board directors are regularly reviewed, and also new directors are brought on board. So you could set a timeline, maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 6, but every 3 to 6 years, make sure that directors are rotated out and new directors are brought back in. This way, you ensure that everyone on the board is bringing fresh ideas and that no one subscribes to the same thinking as their friends and assume that the other person on the board knows what they're talking about.
We are now moving into the last part of our discussion. In this section, we will provide you with an insight on how fund manager and limited partner assess ESG integration. What are limited partners looking for? There are a number of aspects that limited partners are looking for when they come to your fund. We have flagged a number of them, and I think when you go through some of the documents, you will find the information in detail. However, we will pull out some of the critical things that we need you to understand and ready when they come to visit you. You need to be able to demonstrate your understanding of ESG principles. It doesn't really have to be perfect. You just have to show that you understand and have an idea of how you're going to integrate it. I think the other thing that we really want to flag is your intentionality of the fund manager in terms of their willingness to develop the process. We will really advise you that when they come to visit you for the first time, you should be able to demonstrate that you have made an attempt in terms of developing some of the process. It can be an ESG policy. It doesn't really have to be perfect. Whatever you have and whatever you can present to the LP, it will speak volume about the level of your commitment when it comes to ESG. The other aspect that we really want to flag to you is the evidence that ESG factors were considered during the investment decision making, and you will continue to consider it throughout your investment process. That's something that they really want to understand, because they don't want to see ESG that is only done on an ad hoc basis or done for the sake of meeting the requirement of the fund managers. The last part that I really want to flag is your capacity as a fund manager to be able to address ESG. You need to be able to demonstrate that from your senior management, especially the C-suite, you have got the capacity to integrate, and you have got an oversight role to make sure that ESG is fully integrated. That's exactly what they really want to see. That will be able to fine-tune whatever process you have in place as you go through the due diligence or post the due diligence. The other element that I really want to flag that is critical, although we talk about the ESG, you need to understand that if there's one thing that LP really want to see, they really want to see accountability. They also want a fund manager which is transparent. So you need to have appropriate governance mechanism that ensure transparency and accountability in your fund. That will really ensure making sure that you also have a board oversight in terms of what you do. That will help them at least have high regard on your fund and be able to get comfort in terms of investing with your fund.
So what should fund managers have in place? New fund managers can be overwhelmed with the laundry list that LPs or limited partners approach you with. That said, limited partners are fully aware that new fund managers are at the beginning of the ESG journey and therefore will not have every aspect of an ESG management system in place. The things that you should have in place are items such as ESG policy, as well as a code of conduct and an ABC policy. In addition, you should also have a prohibited activities list, also known as an exclusion list, in place. This list provides examples of businesses in which you will not engage with. And these include businesses which provide or develop ammunitions, companies where there have been forced or child labor, and also companies engaged in gambling. Basically, what this list says is that if you come across a company that engages in any of these activities, that you will stop engaging with this company moving forward right at the sourcing stage of your investment process. Keeping in mind as well that every LP does have their own version of this list. And as you negotiate with the LPs, you will arrive at one common list, which you will then leverage for your fund and any investments that happen through this particular fund. Another thing that you should have in place is an annual ESG reporting template, keeping in mind that the initial template you start with may not be the template that you will be providing to LPs at the end of the negotiations, but it does provide you with an initial negotiating position. LPs do have requirements that will overlap, and about 87 of annual ESG reporting requirements from LPs do tend to overlap. It is up to you to then arrive at a template that is common to all your limited partners so that you're only providing one annual ESG report per LP per fund, as opposed to multiple reports to multiple fund managers. We also do require that ESG is mapped step by step within an investment process. This ensures that ESG is considered at every stage of an investment process. If it sits outside the investment process, there are opportunities where ESG considerations do get missed out. And this way, your investment committee is not getting a holistic picture of the business itself. A case in point is one of the companies we looked at in West Africa, where we discovered while doing the ESG due diligence that they were keeping triple books. However, this was not discovered by the financial, compliance, or legal DDs. And if ESG had not been part of the investment process and the decision-making process, this would have been entirely missed. And as a result, we were able to avoid making this investment.
How do you find the balance between LP and GPs? One thing you need to understand and remember is this is a two-way relationship. The LP needs the GP the same way the GP needs the LP. As you negotiate terms for the side letter, consider the following aspects. Use a competent person to negotiate the legals, such as lawyers, in collaboration with your ESG lead or ESG expert. This will help you to ensure that all the terms that you put on your side letter are material and is something that the company will be able to manage to deliver on them. The second aspect that I really want to flag is to understand the ESG term included on the legal agreement. Remember, they are as important as commercial terms, and that can have an impact on a future drawdown. One thing that you really need to understand what exactly constitutes condition precedent. Condition precedent are those things that your fund will never progress or will never receive money until they are met. So ensure that all things that you agree as CPs are not going to delay the progress of your investment or kill the investment itself. The second aspect is also to understand what exactly constitutes the breach and what are the proposed remedy for that breach. Normally, you will find that on your side letter or your legal terms, they will have outlined that this aspect constitutes the breach. So those things you need to be aware of and make sure that you don't really breach them. The other aspect you need to remember is the reporting requirement. Van has outlined them in detail to say, you will find that in one fund, you have got 5 investors. You are not going to have time to complete 5 reports from 5 investors. But if you don't really negotiate the terms and how you can consolidate the report into one template, you will find yourself completing 5 reports because each investor will have imposed their own requirements that are onerous to them and you need to go to their report. So make sure that when you negotiate for the side letter, you provide the template that you really want to utilize and encourage all LPs to contribute to that template as well during the due diligence stage. The other aspect that I really want to outline is that you need to make sure that your investment team understand the agreed terms, because they're the ones who are going to go out in the field and negotiate terms with portfolio companies. Their misunderstanding of the terms might constitute a breach, because certain things that need to be considered might be missed out as well. The last aspect that I really want to outline, and that is very important, especially coming from the LP. The IC takes a long time. And when you go to IC, you really want to present all the aspects that you really want the committee to approve. Avoid asking for deviation after the approval of the fund. That will make it so long and tedious process from the LP side. And also it might appear that you are not really that much committed to ESG. So as much as you really have that relationship with IC, you don't want to keep on going back, asking for them to change the terms that they have outlined, because that will have a long-term impact on your fund as well. The last part that I want to flag is that you need to be very willing to negotiate with your LP. Identify what works for you and make sure that you are able to negotiate. You need to have your non-negotiable. You have to have things that you are willing to forego as well. And in that process, it will make that relationship more productive and also more healthy.
The last aspect of this module that we're going to look at are legals, and the legals between the GPs, which is yourselves, and your portfolio companies. These legals are also known as a shareholders agreement. ESG terms should also be included in your shareholders agreement in addition to any compliance, financial, and legal requirements that go in. They are included here to make sure that the portfolio company is fully aware of the ESG terms that they're committing to as part of your investment into them. ESG terms that you've agreed with your LPs should be included in the shareholders agreement. This makes sure or ensures that you are not in breach of any ESG requirements when it comes to your LPs. The second thing that also should go into your SHA is the corrective action plan. The corrective action plan is the output of your ESG due diligence. It basically maps out what the gaps are within the company with regards to ESG and provides remedial actions along with timelines and responsibilities. This makes sure that the company is fully aware of where the gaps are and that these gaps are addressed in a timely manner. The next thing that you also want to do is identify an ESG lead and include them within your SHA. There will definitely be times when a company has not considered ESG prior to your engagement with them. As a result, they may not have an ESG person in place. It is, of course, perfectly acceptable to invest in this company. Just make sure that one of the first actions when it comes to the corrective action plan is the identification and appointment of this ESG lead. Usually, a period of 1 to 3 months is assigned for identifying and appointing this individual. The last aspect on the slide that I'm going to touch on is reporting requirements. As already mentioned previously, you have commitments to your LPs, one of which is providing an annual ESG report. You definitely want to make sure that the portfolio company is fully aware of this requirement. This way, you're ensuring that you're not in breach of any of your LP requirements and timelines in meeting these requirements. You also want to ensure that you have flexibility when it comes to reporting requirements, recognizing that as you evolve as a firm, your reporting requirements may evolve as well. An example is at this stage of your investment, you may only be looking at providing basic ESG information, but as your ESG requirements evolve, you might start asking for KPI reporting. You may also start looking at the kind of impact that you're delivering. So ensuring that there's flexibility built into your SHA ensures that you are then able to pass this on to your portfolio companies, and that as your ESG requirements gain complexity, so does what your portfolio companies report to you does. This brings us to the end of this module. We hope that this module has provided you with some insight into ESG, what it means for you as a firm, as well as the relevance to your businesses and the communities in which you engage with.
Thank you for your time. As part of a reminder, we have included reading material as part of the pack. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
And just a last point, Hungry and High have developed a PowerPoint template to help guide you through your ESG thinking. This is also available as part of the readings, and we hope that this template will help you think and map out ESG within your firm and within your investment process. We wish you all the best.